Okay, in this video we're going to look at how we solve some linear equations when they contain fractions. Most people really don't like working with fractions, so we're going to look at an approach that allows us not to do that, or another approach that allows us to use our technology to kind of help us. And those are two reasonable approaches. The first approach we talk about here, we'll just work with the fractions that are in the equation, and we're going to use a calculator as we need to for help with the calculations. Most calculators today do work in fractions, and it's a good idea for you when you're solving an equation with fractions that you never actually use rounded off decimals. I've seen students over the years who, when they have fractions, they'll convert them over to a decimal and they'll round them off. And that's going to impact the accuracy of your final answer. So we want to always be working back to fractions here when we work with the calculator. The second method is a way that we're going to actually get rid of all the fractions in our equation. And we're going to do that by finding some common multiple of all of the denominators that are in the problem, and we can then multiply the whole equation by that number. And I'll show you what that looks like when we get to the next example. Alright, we're going to solve this equation. 1/3 x plus 1/4 equals 1/2 x minus 2/3, and we're going to do it using both of the methods that we talked about on the front page. So the first method is going to be to just actually go ahead and work with this equation with the fractions. And so we want to get all of our x's on one side, and we want to get all of our numbers on the other side. And so we will go ahead and we'll subtract 1/2 x from both sides, bring all our x's over to the left. And we'll subtract 1/4 from both sides, bring all our numbers over to the right. And so now I'm going to do 1/2 minus 1/3. If you don't like to do that, in your head or on paper, you can go ahead and do that on our calculator. Oops. We want 1/3 minus 1/2. And on these calculators, when we get a decimal answer, we can use the math key over on the left-hand side, right below the yellow and green buttons. Use the math key, and the very first selection is an arrow with a frac. That means we're going to turn the answer into a fraction. If I bring that out to the main screen and hit enter, it'll change that over to a fraction for me. And so that's negative 1/6 x. And then on the other side with the numbers, I have a minus 2/3 minus 1/4. And I'm going to change that over to a fraction, again using the math and the arrow frac command. And that turns into negative 11 over 12. Now to get x by itself, I have two choices since I have a fraction. I can either go ahead and divide by negative 1/6. I seriously don't discourage people from doing this because students tend to forget parentheses when they do this, and then you end up dividing by the wrong number. A better thing to do would be to take this whole equation and multiply it by the reciprocal of negative 1/6, which is negative 6. And just take both sides and multiply them by negative 6. If we do that, the negative 6 times the negative 1/6 turns into a positive 1x. And on the right-hand side, negative 11/12 times negative 6 gives me a positive 5.5. I'm going to convert that over to a fraction, and that gives me 11/2 as my final answer. Okay. Now in method 2, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find a number that is a common multiple of all the denominators in this original equation. And the smallest such number is 12. So I'm going to take this whole equation and multiply it by 12. And that's going to wipe out all the fractions. Oops. Multiplying the whole equation by that 12, not just the left-hand side. And so I take 12 times 1/3. Easy way to do that, just go ahead and take 12 times 1 and then divide the result by 3. 12 times 1 is 12, divided by 3 is 4. It gives me 4x. 12 times 1/4, 12 times 1 is 12, divided by 4, that's 3. And then 12 times 1/2 x, 12 times 1 is 12, divided by 2 is 6. And 12 times minus 2/3, 12 times 2 is 24, 24 divided by 3 is 8. And so we've gotten ourselves an equivalent equation where there are no fractions in it. And now we can go ahead and solve from here. Subtract 6x from both sides, subtract 3 from both sides. And we've got negative 2x is equal to negative 11. And then we divide both sides by negative 2. And we get that x is equal to 11/2. I tend to find that a lot of people like this method better because they just don't have to work with the fractions. They can turn the equation into an equation that completely doesn't contain any fractions in it, and most people find those a lot more comfortable to work with. All right, let's do a couple more this way, just so you can get the idea a little bit more. We'll look at part A here, and so I'm looking for a number that is a common multiple of all of these, and that number is going to be 12. Again, 12 is a common multiple of all of those. I'm going to multiply the whole equation by 12. 1/2 x times 12, 12 times 1 is 12, divided by 2 is 6, 6x, minus 5, 6. 5 times 12 is 60, divided by 6 is 10. 1/3 times x, 12 times 1 is 12, divided by 3 is 4. And 1/4 times 12, 12 times 1 is 12, divided by 4 is 3. And now we have an equation that we can just go ahead and solve without worrying about fractions. We'll subtract 4x from both sides. We'll add 10 to both sides. And we end up with 2x equals 13. And divide both sides by 2. And we get x equals 13 over 2. Okay. And let's go ahead and look at part B. 2/3 x plus 1/5 equals 1/10 x plus 5/6. We're looking for a common multiple of 3, 10, 5, and 6. The smallest one that I can think of is 30. I'm going to go ahead and multiply this whole thing by 30. 30 times 2/3, 30 times 2 is 60, divided by 3 is 20. 30 times 1/5, 30 times 1 is 30, divided by 5 is 6. 1/10 x times 30, 30 times 1 is 30, divided by 10 is 3. And 5/6 times 30, 30 times 5 is 150, 150 divided by 6 is 25. Sometimes you still might need a calculator to help you a little bit with these. If the multiplications and divisions get a little bit above where your comfort zone is, then you're always welcome to go ahead and use one when that's the case. And now I have an equation with no fractions. I'm going to get all my x's on one side and all my numbers on the other. 20x minus 3x. 6's cancel, the 3x's cancel. 25 minus 6 is 19. And now we'll divide both sides by 17. And we get x equals 19 over 17. I think that's a real nice strategy to help us out when we're solving equations that have fractions in them, to turn them into things that aren't fractions so that we don't have to worry about doing calculations with fractions and don't have to consider the idea of rounding numbers off. So I hope you like that, and I hope you use it successfully to help you better solve linear equations that contain fractions. All right, that's the end of the video. See you next time.